Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of September of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to remind you one of the most important things that took place in the previous year. If you remember, Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, appointed to the position of the head of Special Military Operation Surovikin, this person, Sergei Surovikin, exactly almost a year ago. On the 8th of October of 2022, this person became a head of special military operation, and exactly from the 8th of October of 2022, the Russians started bombing and attacking the Ukrainians' energy facilities. That was one of the most important events that took place during the autumn of the previous year, and starting of the 21st of September of 2023, the Russians launched the second round of energy facilities war. And basically starting of the 21st of September, the Russians began bombing and attacking the Ukrainians' oil refineries, the Ukrainians' industrial zones, and the most important, the Ukrainian energy facilities. Let's discuss these strikes because they were pretty important, they were very important, and the first strikes and explosions took place in Kharkiv. The Russian sources reported that the main target in Kharkiv were the tank service facilities, tank production plants, and as a result of Iskander strikes, a lot of those tank facilities and plants were destroyed. Furthermore, the Russian sources published the video of Iskander strike. On this video, we can see the launch of Iskander, and for example, you see this small red circle, and this is the Iskander strike inside of the circle. And as a result of strike, another barrack or another service building, tank service area was destroyed. As you can see, significant strike. The Russians were able not just to hit the building, but also the Russians were able to be above this territory, to record this, and as we can see, there were no problems, no barriers against the Ukrainian air defense systems. And this is the most important question. The Russians currently don't have any issues with Ukrainian air defense systems, at least in the vicinity of Kharkiv. The next settlement, the next area that was attacked by the Russian missiles was the territory, the hotel that located in the settlement by the name of Cherkasy, the Hotel Centralne. The Russians reported, as you can see, this hotel is located in the middle of the building in the central part of the city, and the Russians reported that that was the base of foreign legion soldiers. The Russians reported that today around 40-50 soldiers of foreign legion visited this city, this hotel. They had some apartment there. The Russians managed to discover that, and as a result of missile strike, that building, that hotel was destroyed, and a lot of significant number of foreign soldiers were buried under the ruins of that building. And this is not the first strike in this area. If we increase the number of updates since the beginning of September, we're gonna see that a few days ago, the Russians made another missile strike against the energy facilities, against the oil refinery, Kremenchuk oil refinery, that located a little bit to the southeast from Cherkasy. As a result of that strike, the Russians managed to destroy the entire oil refinery, and we understand that Ukrainians are using, or at least were using, this oil refinery to supply and support their main forces all over the combat line. The next area that was under very heavy attack is Kiev. When talking about this area, the Russians tried to hit almost the same story as they attacked in Kharkiv. The tank service plants, the tank production plants, so very heavy industry that Ukrainians use to repair and to produce heavy weapons, including tanks. And also the Russians destroyed a warehouse of dead tanks, let's call it like this, like that. They're not like donors, they use these facilities for tank parts to fix and repair those tanks that still can be used on the combat line. Also, there were a lot of explosions in the central part in the vicinity of Vinnytsia. We haven't received currently details regarding that strike. In Khmelnytsky as well. Of course, when talking Khmelnytsky, we understand that the most important target is the airfield in Starokonstantinov, where we can find the base of 7th Aviation Brigade that have Su-24 aircrafts that the Ukrainians use to attack the Russian forces, the Russian positions with Storm Shadow missiles. But this is not the last attacks, this is not the end. The most important updates are coming from the most western part of Ukraine. There was another explosion, another strike in Rovna. And we know that there is a Rovna nuclear power plant that Ukrainians use to support and supply with electricity almost the entire western part of Ukraine. And as a result of another strike today, the Russians destroyed or damaged the lines, energy facilities lines that connected the nuclear power plant with the entire western region. And today we got some updates from the Ukrainian sources that there were a lot of problems with electricity supply in this area. But when talking about this area, we need to be very careful regarding the Ukrainians' reports regarding the results, because if you remember the previous year, the Ukrainians often used this situation with the results of strikes to increase and probably to show better results for the Russians of their explosions, just with purpose to force them to move their target somewhere else and not to attack more this territory with missiles. And another explosion took place in Lvov. The Russians reported that as a result of that strike, they managed to get and to destroy the Ukrainian another oil refinery plant, another oil facilities, oil depot in Lvov. And as a result of that strike, a significant industrial area was damaged that Ukrainians were using to produce oil, to produce gas, to produce fuel for the Ukrainian army. A lot of explosions, and one more time, we can say that the 21st of September is the beginning of the second energy facility war in Ukraine. And I believe that the Russians are going to attack more and more. But this is not the most important things. The most important things that I would like to discuss with you is that according to the configuration and geography of attacks, we see that the Russians are able to get almost the most western part of Ukraine, of course when talking about this oil refinery. But there are areas on the territory of Ukraine that the Russians are not attacked or haven't been attacked yet, and we haven't received even a single confirmation of any Russian attack in these directions. And this is very important because, as I understand after this analysis I made, that the Ukrainians do have some territories that they can use to hide equipment, to hide Western weapon, to hide missiles, to hide aircraft, to hide uranium depleted rounds, and so on. So let's try to analyze and let's find this blind spot that the Russians are not attacking or haven't attacked yet. And the first area is coming from Sumy and Chernigov area. For example, we haven't received almost nothing from this territory. For the previous months, there was just one explosion that took place in Chernigov a few weeks ago, when the Russians managed to discover and find down some building where the Ukrainians were planning to make some meeting about drones, and the Russians, only then the Russians attacked this territory. But when talking about big events, the Russians are not attacking this territory, and probably the main reason of absence of any attacks is that it's very difficult or highly unlikely the Ukrainians are able to hide anything in this area, because this sector is too close for the Russian borders to the Russian positions, and basically the Russians do have a lot of equipment they can use to follow this territory and track everything. The second area is the western part of Ukraine. We are talking about Kovel. I believe that the Russians haven't attacked this territory yet, and just because of the same reasons about Chernigov and Sumy. This territory is located too close to the territory of Belarus. Belarus is very close to the Russians. They share with the Russians the same equipment, and basically the Russians do have necessary information regarding this territory. So this is also just a waste of time to try to hide anything in this sector. The third area that Ukrainians use, and that we still haven't received even a single confirmation of any Russian attack in this area. For these purposes, it is better to increase the number of updates since the 1st of August. is this territory in the vicinity of South Ukrainian nuclear power plant. This territory. This sector is located between the settlement like Kremenchuk, Vinnytsia, like Odessa, Nikolaev, this white cloud. And as you can see, according to all these geolocations, since the 1st of August, we haven't received nothing from this territory, and this is very important. This is very important because, as I understand, there might be a lot of explanations of that, and the first explanation is that this territory, to be more precise, the territory of South Ukrainian nuclear power plant, is completely covered with different types of air defense systems, and the Russians don't have even a chances to penetrate this air defense and to hit the Ukrainians' ammo depots and their positions. Nuclear power plant, as I understand, Ukrainians are using to hide their uranium depleted rounds to cover the radio signal, radiational signal with this nuclear power plant. This is the only explanation I have, and the Russians need to find some solution if they want to be successful how to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt in this area, because this is one of the key regions that Ukrainians have in this war, in this special military operation. Just based on this area, the Ukrainians can counterattack, can repel the Russian attacks, can supply and support their forces in all over the entire Ukraine. But this is not the last territory, because this is something like operational territory that Ukrainians use to, for logistic purposes, to send one cargoes to one point from another. The most important area that Ukrainians use, and that the area that we haven't received nothing, is the area of Karpaty Rocks, this territory. This is one of the most important and one of the most secure territories in Ukraine, and this is like mountain area. There are a lot of underground facilities, a lot of underground tunnels that connects one part of Ukraine with another, and one country, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia with Ukraine, and so on. And the Ukrainians use this territory to hide their aircrafts like Su-24, Storm Shadow missiles, and different types of weapons. And this perfect territory to hide equipment, because there is like natural barrier as a rocks. And of course, the Russians don't have possibilities to penetrate rocks. During these 2 months, the Russians made few attempts to attack the edge of western part of Ukraine with Kinzhal. That event took place on the 11th of August, but after that, we haven't received nothing. We haven't received any attempt from the Russian side to penetrate this area with Kinzhal more. So as I understand, the Russians can't penetrate the rocks with Kinzhal, and this is the only area where the Ukrainians can feel themselves secured. The Russians bombed and attacked the railway stations around this territory, but we see no attacks against this mountain area at all. So basically, we can make a conclusion that currently the Russians have complete missile superiority all over the entire Ukraine, but there are just two areas that the Russians can't cover. And we are talking about Karpaty mountain area and the area in the vicinity of South Ukrainian nuclear power plant. The Russians need to do something with these territories, and as I understand, during these autumn and winter campaigns, let's say Energy Facility War Volume 2, the Russians will try to solve issues with these sectors, probably with South Donetsk, South Ukrainian power plant, first of all. And when talking about Karpaty area, I don't think that the Russians can solve this air issue at all, because basically nobody has any type of weapon that can destroy or ruin this territory except the nuclear weapon. And we understand that nobody is going to use the nuclear weapon in this area. Now we're moving to the situation on the ground, and we got significant number of updates, and the most important ones are coming from Bradley Square. The Ukrainians, the second day in a row, tried to penetrate and to attack the Russian positions in Verbova. And for these purposes, the Ukrainians sent significant number of infantry that tried to penetrate, to attack the Russian positions with soldiers who are trying to move along the trenches. All these soldiers all over the time are bombed by the Russian drones, by the Russian FPV drones, by the Russian artillery systems. The Ukrainians made significant number of attempts. Mainly they're using the forces of 71st and 82nd Brigades. Significant number of losses. Most of these videos about the Ukrainian losses, about destroyed Ukrainian forces. As you can see, a lot of geolocated videos. We're not going to watch them because of significant number of casualties among the Ukrainian soldiers. And The thing is, I will try to describe the situation with few words, is that Ukrainians are not using support of armored vehicles. Mainly they're trying to use just armored vehicles. They try to land armored vehicles very far to the combat line. For example, this is one of the examples when the Ukrainians got as close as possible to the combat line with armored vehicle. They tried to land the troopers, but at some point they were so slow and the Russians destroyed that armored vehicle with some attack, probably with anti-tank weapon. Most of the Ukrainians managed to survive. Maybe some of them were wounded, but anyway, this is an example. And if we calculate the distance between this area where the Ukrainians tried to land their troopers and the area of main attacks, it's around 4 kilometers. Imagine yourself 4 kilometers fully loaded with guns, with grenades, with munition. You need to run very fast across the fields, across the minefields, and only after 4 kilometers you need to start assaulting and storming the settlement, like Verbova, a stronghold in Zaporozhye. Just 2 words: suicide operation. Suicide operation. No, 3 words, 4 words. The biggest suicide operation ever. The Ukrainians don't have chances to success to achieve any results using these tactics when they forced to drop their forces in 4 kilometers from the real combat line, and after that they're moving with infantry under very heavy Russian fire. And you need to understand that the Russians are not using cluster rounds. They're using just regular artillery shells. If the Russians were using cluster rounds, I believe that Ukrainians wouldn't even achieve these results at all. Also, the Ukrainians tried to concentrate their forces in the vicinity of Robotyne, and there is the same story. The Russians, when talking about Robotyne direction, mainly used their FPV drones, artillery strikes, and TOS flamethrower systems to attack, to destroy, and to slow down the Ukrainians. As I understand, the level of loss of the Ukrainian forces is significant during the previous days. When talking about the Ministry of Defense report, they told us that the Ukrainians lost just 50 soldiers in Zaporozhye direction, but that was the losses for the previous 24 hours. When talking about these 24 hours, I believe that tomorrow we are going to receive significant numbers. Maybe few hundreds of soldiers were destroyed during these actions and during these attacks. When talking about interesting details, we need to, of course, discuss that the Russians started bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Novodanilovka. As you can see on this video, the Russians during the night time, when the Ukrainians tried to regroup and to reconcentrate their forces, were bombing the main supply roads from Novodanilovka that goes in direction of Robotyne and Verbova. And the reason of that is that Ukrainians, to attack the Russian positions, tried to use very interesting tactics. First of all, the Ukrainians tried to concentrate their forces somewhere in Orechov, Novodanilovka. We saw they tried to pack on some armored vehicles. They're packing armored vehicle, then armored vehicle moved to the combat line. Somewhere in the fields, the Ukrainians unpacking these vehicles, and they create a lot of small groups, small tactical groups of 2-3 soldiers, and they stretch their forces all over the combat line, and it is very difficult for the Russians to attack Ukrainians of groups of 2-3 soldiers. And as you can see, according to this video, we haven't received almost nothing from the central part of the fields, because the Russians understand there is no reason to attack these fields with artilleries, because there are very small groups of 1, 2, 3 soldiers, and they are very stretched. But we see a lot of videos almost from the combat line, because before any attack, the Ukrainians need to concentrate the forces, those who manage to survive on fields, they need to concentrate them and then to attack. So the Russians understood that there are 3 points of attack. The point before the line of attack, like in this Verbova, the fields, and the first point is the area of the first concentration. And basically the Russians realized that there is no need to attack the Ukrainians in the fields because they're too stretched, but they can attack them before the attack line, but it is too dangerous because the Ukrainians have already reached the combat line, and there are risks and chances that they manage to penetrate and to capture the settlement. So that's why they started bombing and attacking the Ukrainians in Novodanilovka. Danilovka, so at the beginning of their attack, at the beginning of their main concentration. And also this is the area of the most concentration of forces, when they have like 100% like forces without losses. And this is like the purpose, and this is the reason why the Russians have changed their artillery tactics in this direction, in this area. Now we are moving to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Today we got also a lot of updates. The Ukrainians discovered another Russian artillery system, and as a result of HIMARS strike, another Russian artillery system was destroyed. Very expensive HIMARS against a very cheap Russian artillery system, part 2 we can say. When talking about the area Novomayorsk and Novodanilovka, the Ukrainians were completely defeated during the previous weeks, and today the Russian sources published the video of abandoned and destroyed armored vehicles among the fields, among the tree lines, between the settlements like Zolotaya Niva, Prichistovka, Novodonetsk, and Novomayorsk. A significant number of armored vehicles that were abandoned by the Ukrainians during the battle. We see that a lot of these vehicles are still correct. Either the Russians and the Ukrainians can fix them, but we don't see any evacuation process, because we understand neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to evacuate anything from this area. So I expect that within the next few days we're going to receive a lot of videos of Lancet strikes, of FPV drone strikes. Either the Russians and the Ukrainians will destroy these armored vehicles, because everybody understands that nobody can evacuate and nobody can allow anybody to evacuate these armored vehicles. We got a very interesting video from Uglidar. The Russians made another FAB 500 strike. There are two interesting things from this video. The first one is that the Russians continue bombing and attacking the settlement, and the second thing is that, as you can see according to this video, most of the buildings are correct. The Ukrainians still can use them at a fire point, at the strongholds, so the battle for Uglidar is not even started, because of the fact that most of the strongholds and shelters the Ukrainians still can use to repel any attack from the Russian side. Now we are moving to Donetsk direction, and we got a lot of updates from Klishchevka, Bakhmut. The battle for this area continues, but the thing is that Ukrainians stabilized the front line. We haven't received almost nothing from this area from the Ukrainian side, but we had a lot of videos how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions with artillery rounds. And about this situation with artillery rounds, this is very important, and I would like to discuss with you this topic in details. Now, when talking about today, the 21st of September, we will in a minute to zoom out a little bit. We have significant number of geolocated videos from the Russian side. All these red icons is a geolocated video of another strike, another explosion, another usage of artillery rounds, FPV drones. And when talking about Ukrainians, we can count on our fingers of one hand the number of Ukrainian geolocated videos for today. We see how the Ukrainians are completely suppressed and reduce their activity. There may be a lot of reasons of that. Probably they're trying to collect some forces before the next round of attack, but this story is not about them. One more time, when talking about Vremivka, when talking about Orekhov, a lot of icons with artillery strikes, with artillery bombings, the same situation in Klishchevka, a lot of videos with artillery bombings and so on. And I have a feeling that that the Russians start using artillery rounds massively. Not like before any counter-offensive operation and then they will stop. No, as I understand, currently we can see the results of negotiations between Vladimir Putin and the head of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. Currently the Russians probably signed every necessary document and paper, and they can start using their artillery rounds massively, because they know that maybe in a day or in a two they're going to start receiving the North Korean rounds, and they're going to have no problems with rounds at all. Or maybe the North Korean rounds have already got on the fields and the Russians start using them. Who knows? But when talking about today, I see complete superiority in artillery attacks from the Russian side. Significant number of geolocated videos, and I believe that we can connect these two events. When talking about Donetsk direction, as a result of clashes, the Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers. Significant number of losses. When talking about the Battle of Novoigorovka, Liman direction, the Ukrainians published the video of a failed Russian attempt to attack, of another failed attempt to attack from the Russian side. The Russians managed to concentrate some armored forces, they managed to collect tanks, armored vehicles, infantry, and they started their movement, but at some point the Ukrainians started bombing and shelling them heavily. The Russians lost a few tanks, few armored vehicles, unknown number of infantry, and were forced to stop their offensive operation without any progress. But at least according to the Ukrainian sources, maybe the Russians will publish their own video tomorrow, and we're gonna see some results. When talking about Kupiansk, the Russians launched the storming operation, the first phase of storming operation of Sinkovka. They started bombing and attacking the edge position of Ukrainians in the settlement, in the village. So the storming process has started. Now we need to wait when the Russians will reduce the first line of defense, and then they're going to start the ground operation. Also, we got the photo of fire anomalies in the vicinity of Kupiansk. As you can see, most of this territory is under very heavy fire. That means that all these like orange and red clouds means the fire area or fire anomaly. That means that there is some explosion or something like this, and we understand that all these points are located in the vicinity of Kupiansk, above, under the Ukrainian legs. So the Ukrainian territory is under very heavy fire, and we see almost complete absence of any fire dots on the territory of Russian Federation. That means that the Russians established complete artillery superiority, probably with rounds from North Korea, who knows. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.